Welcome back to the Wedding Capture Code podcast, and this is outside of our normal scheduled programming because this is part two of a two-parter. Essentially, last week we sat down to record an episode about shooting the ceremony and speeches. Went on a bit long, so we've decided to split it into two. If you haven't seen last week's episode, it's all about shooting the ceremony, and this week's episode is going to be about shooting the speeches. So hopefully there's some takeaways in it for you or a refresher on some stuff you already know. Let's get into it. So speeches, it's going to be shorter because it's more of the same. Like we've covered a lot of the things that you would think about with speeches, which again is set expectations. For
I feel like speeches are probably one of the biggest times where I'm never more glad to be a photographer.
Yeah, I know it's speeches are probably more of a pain point than a ceremony, purely because, generally, you can get into a routine of it, and over the last few years, we've been getting into a routine of you have the middle, then you have the speeches. The speeches are three men, you mic them up, job done. They've got a PA system, and it's all happy days. Now it's like we're gonna have one before the starter, then we're gonna have one in the middle of the main, probably one at the end as well. Oh, and there's three bridesmaids, mum's doing one, parents of this person, and it's like, oh god.
And I think for you, that's something which needs to, again, for myself, it doesn't make. In my pre-wedding call or questionnaire, I always just say, who's speaking? I don't care how many there are. I don't care who. Just roughly, so I kind of know. I don't go, the speech is done. Yeah. And then wander off to go and get a drink, and someone else stands up, or know that I've got a kind of rough idea in my head of who's going to speak. And then if I go in and photograph the dinner room, I can go, okay, well, best man's not actually sat on the top table because they've got a sweetheart table. So if he's going to stand up from there, or again, if you're in a venue, which often happens where there is a table. There's a window directly behind the top table, and then you know that all three people are stood there. Kind of say, well, is maybe there a way you can stand to the side so you're not shooting straight into complete silhouette?
Yeah, I was going to get into don't be afraid to, especially as a videographer, position the speaker, because often they'll go and they'll just, if they're all on the top table, they'll stand exactly where they were sat, and sometimes that's not the best thing. So sometimes I asked a couple, and I always ask a couple first because some couples want the speaker as close to them as possible.
Yeah,
it's just a thing. I always ask a couple first, but I say, look, the light's pretty bad here. So would you mind if you just move, for example, Silchester has the big window and the top table in front. If they move a few feet off of the top table, that window lights them perfectly, and they're really nicely lit.
And they're naturally lit, so you don't need to put lights up.
Yeah.
You can still get a good angle on it, or the feel of that epic barn, but without fighting the silhouette.
Yeah. So again, with speeches, a lot of things have changed. There's a lot of different, and I love speeches personally. I'm about to sound like I hate it because there's so many logistics to it, but I love speeches. I think they are the thing that drives our wedding films and things like that. You know, that you get the feel, you get the story, you get all of that from it.
And again, I think for me, the biggest thing that I've tried to say for all this is trying to get variety, in speeches and also in ceremonies. I don't want to just have that one shot from one place. Where for you, obviously, if you have a bride and groom or a couple which do personal vows, you've got a fairly good wealth of audio of them talking about each other. But to get a dad or a friend to talk, it changes the tone, doesn't it? It's a different tone of voice, or you can hear an older person talking, or definitely, a younger person talking, or someone talking about them when they were a little, or when they've done, you kind of get a feel of that person because they're being spoke about in the third person.
I think a bride doing a speech is good now. I love it when a bride does a speech. It's often a bit more sincere and planned than when
you're building a story, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you go from speeches primarily alone, a couple say if they have set vows, the same vows to each other, and then you only ever hear the groom side of things talking about his bride. Where if you get a bride that speak, you have more to build a story with, don't you?
Yeah. So just generally what we do is we have in our contract and you can buy a contract online, by the way, which I'll put a link in the description.
I feel that you should link the contract.
Yeah, because we've spoken about it a little bit.
And also, I think most of the stuff that you added into the contract came out of kind of disagreements that you'd had, particularly over ceremonies and speeches. Right?
This is a good point. So just to rewind a little bit, is that in our contract it defines what a ceremony is. Now it's crazy that we've had to do this, but we've been threatened to be sued by a couple because they thought uncut ceremony meant from the moment the first guest walks into that ceremony room until the moment the last guest leaves, all footage is going to be captured uncut, basically. So now in the contract it says from bride walking from procession until first kiss, and that defines a ceremony. But so that's another thing, but that's why you should have sort of
It's
an
what you should buy
airtight
because it's a contract, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it's what you should buy a
It's all
contract.
covered. It's
A
laid
lot
out
of people
for you.
have, and I've had really good comments about it. I haven't spoken
like
about
the FAQ is there to,
Yeah.
you have like a guide, don't you, to kind of talk through all of the terms as well.
Yeah,
and I
explain
think if
it.
you're unsure of that, or that isn't in your contract, obviously that would be, for I think what is a relatively
People will find all kinds of ways, as I found out then, to be like, oh, I don't agree with that or whatever. So yeah,
it's a good way of getting yourself covered. And I think for what the price that you're selling it for, it's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
Compared to what you would charge for a full-day wedding, to have that level of just kind of comfort that your contract has been laid out or you are covered on such finite terms, I think it's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, people are really enjoying it, and I'm getting some good comments about it, so I'm quite happy with that.
Well done, Chris.
Pat on the back for me. So we put in a contract that they should tell us if the speeches are after the meal, they should designate someone or tell someone, whether it's a member of staff or a bridesmaid or groomsman, to come grab us about 15 minutes before. Now, again, this is to cover us. We'll be walking in and out. Don't be a dick about it and be like, oh, if they don't let me know, I ain't coming. We'll be walking in and out and make sure that they're not starting. Yeah. Sometimes 99% of the time, they've done their job, and some, like a bridesmaid, will come in and be like, I've been told to tell you the speeches are starting. So that's great. But otherwise, if you leave it and don't say that, they'll send someone in as they're starting the speeches. And what I want to do is make sure that no one notices I'm there. So I don't want to be like, no, you have to delay the speeches because I'm not set up. I want to be like, yeah, I'm already ready. While they're clearing desserts, I'll be setting up tripods, micing people up and everything. When they're ready, I just do the thumbs up and we're good to go.
And there is a valid reason for this. Like, maybe confession time for me. I did a wedding in 2020, so lockdown year, where I actually missed all of the speeches. Again, it wasn't my fault. I feel like I need to explain. So I was shooting a wedding, a 16 people wedding, because obviously it was October of 2020, so weddings were allowed to happen again, but very, very small. So I was at a hotel. A couple had told me in their questionnaire that the speeches were after the meal, so I had no reason to believe they weren't after the meal. So we had the ceremony, whatever, get into there. They had their dinner in this library. It was obviously a very small table set up, because there was only 16 of them or 15 of them, whatever it was. So they sit down to dinner. Like, the mother of the bride even came over to me and was like, "Are you sorted for food? Because our meal's coming out now." And I was like, "Yeah, don't worry, they've paid for me to have food." Yeah. And so she was like, "Oh well, okay, just go to the bar, and I think they've set it up for you as a tab." Yeah. Rather than you're going to get a wedding breakfast, you'll get a tab in the bar. Yeah. So go to the bar. It's literally just the next room down the corridor. Go get yourself what you want in there. So I did. Went in there, got my food. About half an hour later, the wedding coordinator walks in with a plate for me. Yeah. And was like, "Oh, I've got your wedding breakfast here." I was like, "Well..."
Oh, yeah, I do remember this.
I've just eaten, from the bar. "Oh, okay." I was like, "Well, it doesn't matter. Once I finish this, I'm going to head back for speeches anyway." He went, "Oh, that's all right. I'm just doing mains now, so it'll be all right." Yeah. So, ate my food, drink my drink, wander back to the room, and the harpist who'd been booked to play during the drink reception and the meal was wheeling her harp out of the room, and I knew her, so I was, "Oh, how he is," and that. And she was like, "Yeah, it was really awkward though," because she's like during the speeches, obviously I was still supposed to be playing, so she was like, someone just stood up and started speaking.
And you only found out then.
And that's the first time I found out. And I was like, so she's like, I had to just kind of finish my song kind of abruptly and then just sit in the corner really awkwardly for 15 minutes while they spoke. Yeah. And she was like, and it was really awkward because there wasn't many of them and most of them cried.
I bet your
and
face
I'm freaking crying at this point. And I was like, well, what do you mean the speeches happened? I was like, they weren't supposed to be till after the food. And she was like, oh yeah. And I was like, but the wedding coordinator came to me with food. And I told him that I'd already eaten. And I was like, surely he must have known that I was there. And she was like, well, I guess so. And at that point, I was thinking, freaking the hell out. Yeah. And she was like, oh,
yeah.
And at that point, I was mad. I'm fairly easygoing person. But at that point, I was mad because I was, one, heartbroken that I'd missed the speeches for my couple on a day that they'd been compromised anyway by the restrictions and the rest of it. I obviously was looking to get as much content for them as I could on a day that was really thin on what should have been 70-something guests and was 15. Yeah. And now I've missed what I consider a fairly vital part of the wedding. So he came wandering in, and I probably shouted and swore far too much than I normally do, and was like, well, why didn't you come and get me? Yeah. Oh, well, they were supposed to be after the meal, and then they just started speaking. But you knew where I was, so why didn't you come and get me?
As a venue, you don't just let them start speaking.
As a wedding coordinator, surely you want the best for your couple. Yeah. You knew where I was. Yeah. Oh, well, I thought you were on your break. What, and you think that if someone starts speaking, that even if you'd have come and got me and said, look, they've started speeches without my control, you might want to get back in there, even if I'd have got something.
My first ever paid wedding was at in Bournemouth, and I missed half the speeches. And it wasn't that I wasn't prepared. It was like that you said again, they were supposed to do them after the dinner. But they must have changed the course that they were doing them or something. Because I remember at that point, like I was filming everything because I was so nervous.
Yeah.
So I was filming like them eating their starter and stuff, you know. And then I went to go and eat dinner with the photographer, who was a very experienced photographer. He'd never missed anything like that before either. And we sat down and we were eating, and then someone comes in and was like, "Do you realise the speeches are on happening?" It's like, what? So we literally run in there, and the dad's like just finishing his like toast, and it's like, oh no, and like this is my first ever paid wedding, so I'd only done one wedding before this.
Wow. Yeah.
So I literally like had a recorder, and I just set it up on a light stand and put it. Literally, like groom was speaking as I was putting it in front of him, and then like the couple were okay with it. I think they got some money back from the venue because they like things piled up from the venue that were really bad. But the main thing was it was the venues they'd made it the venue's responsibility to tell us because we were in the bar getting our burger or whatever. And they didn't bother us.
So I felt awful again. It's so difficult. So again, I'd had a kind of a pretty much a verbal with, because at that point I think that there should have been some level of care from the coordinator of the venue to know, especially when he knew where I was, the fact that he come and brought me a plate. If he'd gone, I tried to look for you and you weren't there, but you managed to come straight to me and the rest of it. So I had to kind of say to the couple, straight after dinner, look, I'm really sorry I wasn't there. And again, they were fine. They were like, we didn't really know either. She's like, my dad just got up and started talking. And she was like, to be fair, it was pretty emotional. She's like, so I don't think we would have wanted photos of me sobbing at that level and stuff. So she's like, it's fine. Like we're not upset at you. We're not going to come after you, anything like that. But I felt like I had to air that.
Of course.
Not that I could make him speak again, but address it straight away and say, look, it wasn't just me being lazy. It was this. So
I feel like it's really important to apologise if you've done something wrong, even if it's not necessarily your fault. Like you need to be honest about it.
I knew how mad / upset, anxious I felt for that like half an hour while they finished their desserts to go and get this sorted. I couldn't leave that till after the wedding day and email them and be like, I'm really sorry I missed your speeches. I needed to address that with them there and then, and then walk away from the day. At least feeling then that when I did manage to get the first dance and the little bit of kind of evening sauntering they had, I got a nice like blue hour portrait. I kind of felt like I'd righted myself, or at that point I wanted to then work harder to make sure there was still enough for a gallery there. So now I always double, triple check. I always, like, before I leave the room, if speeches are after the meal, I will always go and find the wedding coordinator or the catering manager, whoever, and more to say, I am going here. If the speeches start, can you just come and get me? Or once you're starting to pour toasts, can you just come and get me? And I almost kind of feel like I need that verbal with them to let them know where I'm going to be.
That's it.
And also double check with them that their schedule lines up with my schedule.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because sometimes you do find
just
that
check the speeches are after,
that we would really push and go, or they filled the questionnaire and go, oh yeah, it's before. And then the bride's filled out the questionnaire, and then the groom's gone, oh no, I'm doing mine after, or I'm doing mine before. I don't want to wait till afterwards.
One thing I'd say is, like, I don't know whether it's just because I've done it for a bit now and I'm like, I don't take any shit, basically. But like, I've had times where they've said it's going to be after the dinner. I've had literally one time where they've been like, oh yeah, it's going to be after dinner. Bride and groom get announced in, and we're literally walking off to get our food, and someone stands up, goes ding ding ding, and at that point, me and Kate are like, what? So then I think one of like the guests that they'd got to sort of introduce the groom is they're passing the mic across. Everyone was clapping. I literally walked up to the groom at that moment and went, mate, we're not set up. Like, you're not going to get this captured. If you do it now, because we've got it down as after, you told us it's going to be after, you're not going to get it captured. And obviously, like, everyone's staring at us. But at the end of the day, like, I'm doing the best for my couple. They've paid me to do the best by them.
And like we said at the beginning of it is, that maybe in that moment, you might seem like a dick stopping the speeches. And you might get booed from the room of rowdy people. But in 10 years' time, when he goes, well, once I was coerced into it, I really wish that I'd had that footage of my speech now. Just because of our bout of peer pressure, I didn't get it. You've got to cover yourself. And also think of the longevity of what you're making for them.
If there was any point that we could have quickly chucked a microphone on and get a camera set up, I probably would have done it. But all our tripods were in completely another room, and it would have taken us ages to set up. So I literally ran up to him and was like, mate, if you do it now, it's not recorded, basically. And like you said, eventually they'll be grateful for that. It might feel really awkward, but I feel like you have to do what your gut says. And we've had a couple of times where one of my favourite weddings biggest weddings I've probably ever done, they decided to move the speeches to before the dinner. And Kate, I can't remember exactly why, but we were like, that can't happen. Like it's going to take us a long time to set up. I think they had a lot of speeches, and they were literally like, 2 minute speeches, and we're like, no. So we literally, like, Kate went up to the bride and groom and was like, look, our dinner's waiting for us already.
Yeah.
You're about to do speeches right now. We're going to miss that. And we're also going to miss your speeches because we're going to be setting up. Please, can you just do it when you said you'd do it? And the bride and groom were well now. I said, like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
And I think that's a lot of things. We see it as a far bigger mountain in our head, but we are ultimately trying to provide them the best service.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you think, oh no, I can't ask them. I can't ask them to do that. And they don't even think of it in that way.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when you explain to a couple when you book a winter wedding, oh, we need to get married early because they go, I don't even think of the light. They're thinking about, you know, it's not their job to think about that stuff.
Yeah.
They're just thinking about it from their point of view, or their mate had the speeches before and they preferred it that way. And it's not when you turn around and go, well, it's actually this, that it actually adds this and this and this to us, that they go, oh, no, sorry, and we'll move.
Exactly,
so those conversations to have beforehand, I think, are really good. Like, personally, I really like a speeches before, but I know how much of a headache that is for you going into it.
Yeah,
and I think
because usually the speeches are before dinner,
Yeah.
and then usually the couple get taken out before that. So I'm on the couple shoot, just loving life, and I'm supposed to be setting up for speeches.
Yeah.
I never get the announcement when that happens, like when they get announced into the room,
I
because I'm setting up tripods.
We did a wedding together, and you had a really, really good hack, which you told me about at dinner, which you were in there.
Yeah,
it's like the steal the microphone hack.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good tip to be able
So
to do
if they've got a PA system and they're using a microphone, if you feel like they might be about to start without you, obviously you want to say, look, I'm not ready, don't start without me. But 90% of the time, if I tell the father of the bride not to start without me, he don't care. He's starting without me.
Anyway, yeah.
So I've got this new thing, what I do, which I just take the mic. Like, can I strap a microphone around the mic? So the venue gives me the microphone and I just walk away and I hide it somewhere. And they ain't starting without it. So that's what I do.
If they're that strongly enough, they're just going to bellow rather than use the mic.
Yeah.
But say if you need to strap one of your little kind of like mics to it, then make sure that's the last job on your list.
Genuinely, it saved me and therefore the couple so many times that now I just do it anyway. So I just take the microphone and I'll carry it around while I'm setting up tripods and that. And they're like, oh, so we need a microphone now. And I'm like, no, you don't, because I'm not ready, so you don't need it. That's it.
And it's such a really good, it's kind of quite a nice way of you're putting that physical barrier in without just coming across like a dick.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly,
you're like, no, I'm taking it because I need to mic it up.
Yeah,
Like, there's a function to it, but you're almost allowing it.
Oh, sorry, I'm still
it can't
still
start
working
without
on
us.
it.
It's just on a promise of, you can,
They won't go, you can't have it back, but I'll be like, no, I'm still actually doing something to it.
And it kind of keeps it, I mean, it's a cool little kind of like sneaky way of almost playing things to your favour.
But yeah, I mean, there'll always be times, and I'd say, I think the first half of this year, most of the speeches started without us even knowing. Like, I worked with you in March, and we told the venue we weren't ready, and they started anyway. And I was annoyed. Like, I was really, and then they went, "Oh, are you okay?" And I was like, "Well, no, because I'm literally like, the speech is going. I'm next to my camera bag. Do I look like I'm okay? No,
I'm not ready yet.
Like, I'm not.
Especially if you get you don't want to miss anybody's speech, but if it doesn't end up being particularly heartfelt or emotional or something, which then would be a real kind of would play a real kind of keystone in your film.
Yeah,
you feel bad that you've heard it and you know that you're missing it. It's hard.
But what I do is normally set up. So in terms of like camera setup, I've normally got some sort of wide or safe shot, and I normally start that recording before anything else. So if they do get up and do if they do get up and do it before I've like set up the other cameras, at least something's recording, and that I've had to use that a lot. So while I'm miking people up, I'll set up another camera, press record, and be like, right, miking people up now. And if one of them decides to stand up and do it while I'm miking them up, at least that wide is recording. And for the first half of last year, a lot of people did that. Like, no matter how much you tell them to wait for you, like, it's on the day. Like, I'm not necessarily blaming them or saying they're bad people, but you're not going to get listened to.
Sometimes it's hard, the balance, isn't it? It's like we spent a lot of time, and I'm sure we'll talk in the next episode about this more, is that when you are chasing those kind of fun-loving, slightly more raucous, free-spirited people at weddings...
Yeah, they're not necessarily thinking...
They're not necessarily the timid people that you can go, here's your microphone, do not talk about it until I give you a thing. And they go, all right. Where you get people that are kind of got a few drinks in from the drink reception and are like a bit more kind of like loud anyway. Like, yeah, I'll start.
Yeah.
And it's
or the other way, where they're not
peril, isn't it, of the type of weddings that you shoot.
They're not necessarily posy couples, and so you've been in the background for so long. If some couples who are like really invested a lot of money in their wedding, they're like the kind of more high end. They're like, oh, I've paid for a videographer. I'm making sure I get that. And then they won't start, and they'll be like, right, I'm waiting for you, basically.
Or their speech is very much for the film rather than for the
film. Yeah, exactly. And they know it's for the film, and they're thinking about that in advance. Whereas, like you say, the sort of couples that maybe we'd go for are a bit more just like laid back and that laid.
I'm not saying much anyway, mate.
Just gonna stand up and crack on. Yeah.
And I think for me, in terms of photography, the only note that I've put, which kind of crosses over with videographers, is again be respectful of their angles. And the only thing that I kind of really ask not to do is that real, and I've had it a few times, which has made life really difficult for me, is that kind of, I'm going to stick a camera on a 35 on a tripod, literally, and the tripod is touching the top table.
Yeah.
So all I can see of the bride and groom's face whilst they're sat is the back of your screen recording. Well, I appreciate you need reactions, but even just if you knocked it back like 2 or 3 steps, if you're able from the top table, that I could shoot across the side with a tight angle, it gives us both a fighting chance. But I did a wedding once where the photographer literally put like a 24 on and had it, like the lens was like an inch off the table, so he got this brilliant shot of the bride and groom through their reaction to the whole speeches, and I could not even shoot them at like 85 without getting the corner of his camera in the screen.
I think that is like the go-to, but I don't do it anymore. But I feel like now I don't do it, I'm actually getting worse stuff, because I've put this in my notes as well, because I think we've spoken about this before, but I used to do the camera in front of the top table thing. I wouldn't say it was like that close, but like I tried to get it a bit further away, but for space reasons, sometimes that camera was in my own shot and things like that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to move it and change something else. So now I've got this 10-foot light stand that I put right at the back, put on a proper zoom lens, and it like try and shoot the top table or the couple. But now I've got the problem where the photographer sees that empty space and stands there, and the photographer's there photographing like the bride and groom's reactions. All I'm getting is this is not everyone, but there's a trend right now of filming like 24 photo in 24 and 35 mil, and so they're right up there in the top table.
And it is hard, and I guess you've, as much as I would be respectful and ask you not to put it so close, you need to say to them, well, don't fill that gap then. You need to be, and I was trying, and I've put in my notes that whilst I'm on the 35-85, most of my speeches will be photographed entirely on the 85. I think sometimes it's brilliant because of the way that you can build layers with that lens. There's also, if you have speeches after dinner, there's a lot of table clutter. There's still sometimes the plates from dessert. There's not only the toast glasses, there's wine glasses, there's wine bottles, there's all of that. And so if you've got an 85, you can shoot quite tight on people, and with a wide aperture, a lot of that mess becomes fall off. And you can really isolate the emotional reaction of that person far more than just seeing the crap on the tables. I photograph that as well because I like that. Or if someone's filming or they've got a stopwatch going because they're doing a sweepstake, I'll always make sure I try and include that. Or if there's a kid watching their iPad and not watching the speeches.
I feel like if there's a time for a zoom lens at speeches, or like Zoom, but like more telephoto.
Sometimes if I'm in a particularly big room and the tables are particularly close together that I can't get through the tables or crouch or kneel between the tables, that APS-C crop mode, like especially now on the Mark IV, to still get an 18 megapixel file out of it, to turn my 85 into like a 120.
For the sake of the emotions you get from it and the better shot, it's worth it.
It's worth doing that and creeping in a little bit closer just to kind of get those tight shots.
In terms of how I film though, is I will circle the room now. So literally the photographer's got full reign of, so I'll be in one corner with my 150 mil. I'll have another on a 10-foot tripod in another corner with like an 85 mil on crop mode or something, getting just the bride and groom. And then Kate will usually be, to be fair, next to the top table facing the guests so that you get their proper reactions. And that's generally and that guest reaction thing, by the way, is huge. Like there's a lot of videographers, and I get this because there's a lot of solo videographers, but a lot of videographers just do shot of the couple, shot of the speaker. You miss so much.
You miss so much as well. And I think because you've got that power of audio to know who's speaking, once you've kind of shown them to go, that's the person with the microphone. And the same with photo. Unless someone's got like a projection or they're using outfits or props or whatever, once you've probably got a good 2, 3, 4, like half a dozen at most shots of that person with their microphone, gesturing, laughing, doing whatever, they pretty much stand in the same space. So you don't need lots of them. It's the way that people react to them.
It's the valuable stuff. Is
the much more valuable stuff. Or even now, like and something which I really started to push on last year is a reaction is great. A tight shot of a reaction is great, but a reaction without context doesn't always mean so much. So I found now to kind of almost sometimes, if you're able to creep round behind a speaker, focus on the person who's like the bride or the groom, and then have the speaker in like kind of fall off, and they're making eye contact with that person who's saying something really nice about them. You know what they're laughing at or what they're crying at, and to kind of have that connection between speaker and listener, or between a guest looking at the bride that they're crying about, that little bit of context rather than just a real headshot of someone laughing. It just means so much more.
you could create context in the gallery if you had two people, but because you've got one, you've got to capture both in the same shot, basically, haven't you? But that I've noticed photographers doing that, but that is a pain because we are getting them in the background.
Shot,
But then I only really care if it's going to be something quite emotional or big that I'm going to put in the.
But it's like the angle that we're talking about in the speeches. That if you stand, you don't have to stand directly behind them. If I'm on an 85 or on 35, I can be 2 steps off. So if you're tight on the speaker, I won't be in your frame, but you'll still get both.
Yeah.
Or also, again, I come from a music background, so you never dwell in a spot for long anyway. You get in, you get your shot, and you get out again.
Yeah.
So
I noticed you do that.
For the 10 seconds that I'm stood behind that speaker, you can be on a different angle.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying you camp there for the entire 10-minute speech.
Yeah.
But and that's what I've put again, the same as for the ceremony, is variety is key. Like I always find there's certain people, particularly when people are sat, that end up in the best light. Do you know what I mean? Like someone's like an absolute peach of a bit of light coming through a window.
Yeah, definitely.
And if them crying in that light, it almost naturally frames them.
Yeah.
There's always maybe going to be a couple more shots of them than the guy sat in the dark corner of the table.
Yeah.
But just trying to add a
variety. The important thing is variety, yeah. Don't just film the speaker.
Or also, if you've sat through dinner and looked through kind of what you've taken and you know, I've got these people and these people in the candids, and you've got a couple of key people that are missing, or you haven't managed to get a nice shot of mum or granddad.
Yeah.
It's an easy time. They're not moving anywhere.
Yeah.
They're sat in that same spot. If they're on the top table, they're probably important to the couple.
Yeah,
so get a nice few shots of them reacting because you know they're going to be there, and they're probably, apart from the ceremony, at their most distracted.
I just did it at a ceremony where the groom was doing a speech and Kate was pointing the reaction camera at the nan and she was asleep. I was like, do I put this in? Because I don't know, I can't decide whether it's
you need a little bit of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's those things, isn't it? Is where, people say, oh, I'd really love some lovely shots of my mum, but she doesn't like the camera.
Yeah.
During the ceremony, you've got a lot else to do. But once you've got a few shots of the guy with the microphone, if she's like looking at her husband or her son or whatever, or daughter or whatever, or her son's mate stitching him up, laughing at things they've done.
Yeah.
You're going to get, they're surely at their most emotive at that point.
Yeah.
And also oblivious to you photographing them. I've had some really good times
so
to photograph parents at that point of the day.
Good point, yeah, because sometimes parents can be a bit especially groom's parents can be a bit more reserved. They're not really part of it, so it's a good
particularly
good
groom's parents. Sometimes even if you have, or there's kind of step families and stuff involved, it's kind of hard to piece together who's the stepmom, who's the mum, stuff like that, where if they're whoever's in the top, you can kind of build it.
Yeah.
It's quite late in the day to do it, but if you are struggling, you know that if that person's been sat on the top table, they're there for a reason.
Or if you had a dark reception drinks or something, then generally the space is a bit wider.
Or they're the people that have gone off to do something else or whatever. They're going to be there.
So the last thing I want to mention, we are about to lose visuals because the battery's going on that. But so last thing I want to mention is using lights but what I think I mean is generally trying to direct it in a way that's going to be good for you. So for example, I had one where I think I had 4 bridesmaids doing a speech and I was like, I don't have enough microphones for all of them plus all the other people doing the speech as well. So I said to the couple, can I put a microphone on a stand and can they all stand around that instead? Obviously they're going to be, because the couple really wanted everyone behind the top table, and I was like, look, I just don't have enough microphones, can I just put a stand next to the top table on it with a microphone on it and get them all to stand around it? And they were fine with that, but everyone else, they wanted to stand behind the top table.
See, I did a wedding, and I think that was a barn, and a particularly dark barn, it was a stone barn with very few windows. And so the videographer in that scenario, he actually said to the couple, do you mind if, for you to get the best out of this? And he got a mic stand out, as a singer, put a mic on a stand and lit. So it was almost like in a comedy club, and I got some really cool dramatic stuff where he had this kind of light beaming down on the speaker.
That's the ideal way to do it,
and that obviously then saved you having the issue of having to mic lots of people up, to light lots of different areas of the room. So it was less intrusive for the guests rather than being beamed. To light the whole room up like a candle.
I wouldn't make a habit of lighting speeches, but there are times. There's a local venue which famously has a big window behind. And the actual venue is quite dark itself. They've got drapes coming from the ceiling, and I've been in there before and been like, I'm getting nothing. It's gonna be silhouette, and it's gonna be a purple silhouette probably as well because of the weird lighting going on inside. So I said to the couple, do you mind if I set up lights? No, we don't want you setting up lights. I said, well, okay, that's it. At least you've said something. And again, I've got that in my contract. If I ask you if I tell you or ask you something that I think is going to be beneficial and you say no, that's on you. Basically, that is in our contract.
Yeah, you've given them the option, and
Yeah.
if they choose to decline it, then that's entirely up to them.
But the next one I did was I just set up lights anyway. I didn't even ask that. But at that time, to be fair, I was like, after
Well, it's a thing that they say a lot, and that's a music thing as well. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than
it
ask for
is.
permission.
Yeah. And I should have done it then, to be fair. But I feel like some things you do have to ask, especially for moments like speeches,
especially in tender moments, like ceremonies and speeches as well. Like if people are going to be the most emotional or kind of on edge or nervous about something, it's pretty much those 2 points of the day.
And then and then look up and there's a light shine in their face. Like, it can
especially if they're a nervous speaker, they feel even more in the spotlight. You literally are spotlighting them.
Yeah. But so it can be done, and you should use lights in a pinch if you've got them, but I think sparingly. And obviously, like, if you're like me and you're more of a natural, like, candid videographer, people aren't expecting you to bring out lights. They're kind of looking at, okay, everything so far has been really like just you and your tiny little camera, and now you're bringing out a light.
I'm the same. Like, again, I think it would take, for me, pretty much somewhere to be cavernous to even entertain using a flash in a ceremony.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather rock like a real high ISO, slower shutter, wide open aperture, and be at the extremes of my camera before I would entertain adding flash to something like a ceremony. And particularly speeches as well.
Yeah, I agree. I've even had times where during the first dance, like, they've gone, can you just turn the lights off? And I'm like, where's pitch black in it? It's like, I don't care. Like, so some people will just prefer the more candid feeling things, but if you feel like, just do what your gut says, isn't it? If you feel like it's too dark, like you say, then do it. We've lost visuals now, so we should probably round it up.
Wrap up. I feel we've turned into an absolute bumper episode, and for an episode that we thought that maybe there would be only a few points to cover, hopefully there's given you some food for thought in there, or maybe a look at the way you do things, or maybe we've given you kind of verbal permission to go, no, it is okay to ask that couple to do this. Or...
Do you know what? The battery going has just given me a thought. During a ceremony speeches, replace your batteries beforehand so you've got 100% when you go into that ceremony and speeches, because we're like an hour and 38 minutes in on the audio recorder. It's probably been recording about an hour and 45 on the camera, and that's gone. Like, so if you're starting 50% battery and the speeches end up being an hour,
and cards as well for you. I remember being at a wedding with a videographer, and obviously him not banking on that the groom and the best man speech would be stupidly long, and him sort of making eyes at me, and I wandered to the back of the room, and he had 2 cards in that camera that were both on less than a minute footage left as the best man's making his final toast, and he said to me, if that speech was 10 seconds longer, the camera would have cut off.
I think I used to. I film on 256 cards now, so that's more than enough for a day for me on each camera. That is anyway. So because I normally rock 2 cameras throughout the day, so I'm sort of filling them up equally.
But particularly with batteries and those, like, obviously when you go into a ceremony, you know roughly how long a ceremony is going to be. But speeches can be absolute how long's a piece of string.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the longest speech that I've ever photographed, like in a single speech, is well over half an hour.
Yeah.
I had a dad that pushed nearly probably 35 minutes by himself. And then I've had some speeches that have barely been 10 minutes for all 3.
I had a Christmas wedding a few years ago where the dad spoke for over an hour, and it was unlimited alcohol, and they were popping Prosecco while he was speaking. Like, he was doing an emotional bit about like how someone had died, and all the tables were like popping, hey, having a party.
Because it was 40 minutes in
they were done. Yeah, literally. Don't use, if you're a Sony user, don't use third-party batteries. That's a little hack for you, because they will just go overheat, or they'll just go really quickly. And make sure you start with 100% battery going into speeches, because you never know how long they're going to be.
That's it. And I think we've covered an absolute breadth of it there.
Yeah,
this is possibly going to be our longest episode.
Maybe a longest episode.
Which, for a practical one, I feel like, again, there'll be loads of takeaways in there.
Yeah.
If you've made it this far, again, and in one sitting as well, then we commend you for listening to us for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited. We're going to go out some lunch and then jump into the next episode, which is the image curation and... what did I call it? It has a set title, Image Curation and Ideal Clients. So I think that would be a really good one to kind of, now that you've edited all that work from 2023, to look back over it and work out what you do with it. We're looking at
branding, targeting, and what you do with your images, So
it'd be a really good one. So thank you for joining us for our second episode of 2024, but the first one actually recorded this year.
First one recorded in 2024,
Yeah, and we will see you
Thanks for joining us.
in the next one.
See you in the next one.